Hi, I'm Ted Price, and on today's episode of the Game Maker's Notebook, I had the pleasure of talking with Kim Pallister, who is the director of the VR Center of Excellence at Intel. Kim is an expert in a lot of different areas, and we focused on augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, and open systems. These are topics that we don't really talk about that much on the Game Maker's Notebook, and so I think a lot of us who are involved in games or even peripherally involved in games will definitely find something new to check out. So please join me.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Pleasure to be here today with Kim Pallister, who is the director of the VR Center of Excellence at Intel. And can you describe what that means?
Yeah, sure. So Intel's a huge matrix company that does a lot of stuff. I live in a group called the Client Computing Group. Probably the thing Intel's most known for is the processors in laptop and desktop computers. That's the business unit that I'm part of. And we realized some number of years ago that gaming was a huge business for us. And so we have a group there who's focused on driving that business forward. How do we take gaming on all flavors of PCs and things related to gaming like esports and like VR and things like that, and just keep it moving forward, keep it progressing, knocking down barriers that are facing people. That's what we're wrestling with.
Well, and you and I realize that our paths have intersected a lot over the last 20 years. Right. And I think just in talking to each other earlier today, it was kind of surprising for both of us.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was saying that I got my start at, I'm originally from Montreal, Canada, and I got my start at a company there called Matrox Graphics that at one point in time was them and ATI were kind of the bouncing back and forth between number one and number two GPU vendors in the world. And that was kind of during that whole first wave of 3D on PCs with, S3 and ATI and 3DFX and rendition and all that. And I only went to work there because they were kind of a stone's throw from mom and dad's house. And so you get out of school and you're like, well, I'll apply there. It's close by. And I just lucked into a space where they were doing high-end graphics cards for PCs for CAD and things like running, 1600 by 1200 Photoshop, which at that time required like a $4,000 graphics card to do, right? And the CEO said, I think this 3D gaming thing is going to go somewhere. Let's go down to this game developer conference and figure out what we need to go do. And so me and other guys started like cribbing the rumored PlayStation 1 spec sheet and other things, and then the business just took off from there, right? So that went through all the kind of proprietary API stuff, the first wave of DirectX. And then when Intel was ramping up their effort with the Pentium 3 and the SoC instruction set, they said, hey, we better build up some 3D expertise. A guy there had met me at a conference. They offered to recruit me to come down. I figured out what American companies were paying versus Canadian ones and was on kind of the next boat out, so to speak. And and then we were saying in the hallway earlier that I think we met because Intel was going out and meeting with developers about different 3D titles, and I think we had a couple of conversations, but you guys were doing stuff on console and kind of dabbling in PC, and in those first conversations, nothing came out of it. But either that, or we've probably drunkenly argued at the Fairmont lobby at some point at GDC or something like that. Right?
Well, we definitely talk. I mean, I think what's been great is that Intel has always been heavily involved in gaming. If not a traditional publisher, Intel has been supporting a lot of our efforts. I say our as an industry to bring high-end graphics to players. I mean, we worked with Intel on The Unspoken, which is a VR game we put out a couple of years ago, and I had to say I was really surprised positively surprised at the enthusiasm and the game expertise that exists at Intel.
Yeah, there's been, you could almost think of it as kind of three waves that have happened in the company. There's just been an everyday end user perspective knowledge amongst the employee base there that like, yeah, this is what people use computers for, right? People play games on computers, and that should be a thing that we take into account, and they make a great, showcase and a good reason for people to aspire to buy a new PC and things like that. And so there was kind of fragmented efforts for many years. And then some, decade-ish back, people started to, and I think it was somewhat in, following the timeline of these kind of specialty gaming PCs, when you started to get the Alienwares and other people that started to build machines targeted directly at gamers, that meant that suddenly you could like track sales that were directly attributable to gaming, and people realized like there's a lot of money here, right? And this is what we always suspected could now be proven, and it justifies the investment and it steers a lot of your efforts. And so there's been a very focused and deliberate effort across numerous teams, and the amount of expertise the company has built up is amazing. We were talking earlier about how there are so many kind of ex-Microsoft, ex-Sony, ex-3DFX people that now I run into in the halls, right? And a lot of expertise, not just from hardware and platform companies, but also from various game studios or whatever. So that I view that as kind of this second wave. And then what we're a lot of the discussion that we're having now is in recognizing that while there is a kind of if you look at numbers from Newzoo or IDC or whatever, you'll see kind of this number getting thrown around of 2.5 billion gamers in the world, around 1.2 billion people playing games on PCs. There's, depending whose numbers you look at, 100 to 200 million of those that are on Steam and on the Epic Game Store and playing high-end games. So, and buying those Alienware machines and other high-end gaming rigs. Who are the other billion people, and how do we meet their needs, right? And so thinking about gaming holistically across the whole range of different computers that the whole industry builds, many of which involve our products, I think it constitutes kind of a new opportunity for us to think about how we take the whole market to the next level, right? I think there's a huge untapped opportunity to directly address and bring better quality experiences and better quality kind of platforms to those users that we'll look back and say, oh, that kind of hardcore gaming lucrative market was only the tip of an iceberg, right? So,
do you think that a lot of the games today that are played by a broader audience are helping spread the word about the importance of CPUs? And I only say this because anecdotally, I have a son who's passionate, and that's probably a too weak a word to use, about Fortnite. And he's at only 11, he was researching CPUs and GPUs along with all of his friends, and they're using vernacular that I would expect from a 20-something-year-old, because they really are interested in making sure that they have the best possible chips. And I think, to Intel's credit, they've been very, what's the word? They put out a lot of information about why CPUs are important for certain games. And NVIDIA, on the same way, has had a great marketing campaign in terms of promoting its GPUs.
Yeah, we went through a similar thing about a year ago at my house, where I've got 3 kids in teen and preteen years, and the schools these days, a lot of them use Chromebooks for kind of everything, right? So they were getting a Chromebook each. And my older son, who's all 3 kids game, but the older son is just an avid gamer, tried to kind of make the case for, I think what I really need is a Lenovo gaming notebook with discrete graphics. And so I made him kind of, well, you write the pitch for me,
Yeah.
You justify why you need this for schoolwork, because I totally knew what he really wanted it for. But I was surprised at kind of the discussions between him and his friends about, well, here's why I need an Optane drive. And I'm like, could you tell me? Because I don't even really remember what our pitch is about that, right? So it goes both ways. There's a kind of, the vernacular and the parlance about these things kind of people get educated about. But you also have wide ranges of people that if you're going to bring gaming experience to them, they have to be able to do that without thinking about it, right? They have to be able to just say, I just want to pick up an iPad or one of these slim notebooks or a phone, and I just want to know it's going to give me a fun experience. It's like if you buy a tablet and you expect it to run Netflix, you don't go looking at bullets about what codec you support. Do you support H.264 and the right variant of that? It's like you've already lost them, right? But in that space where people are passionate about it, we are having a conversation about this the other day. I have a kind of a pet theory that latency is the new frame rate. In that, if you go back to kind of a Sega Dreamcast era or before that, most people didn't really talk about frame rate and frame rate consistency and drop frames and stuttering and stuff like that, or anti-aliasing. And now that's like in that core gaming community, it's pretty well known, right? And now people throw the word latency around, but they kind of don't know what it means. And so we're going to go through a phase of education, again, pet theory of mine, that that we'll find ourselves in 5 years from now, people, being very knowledgeable about what it means. So I was talking about my local input latency, not my network latency, or not the, server round trip time or whatever. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, what does it mean to Intel that now we are looking at the advent of streaming services where games are being rendered on a remote server and the information is being sent to the end user who could play on a Chromebook or phone or anything? Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting. This is already, if you take the core gamer, US centric point of view, it's kind of this thing on the advent, right? Like, someone's taking another run at OnLive, and is Stadia going to work or not? If you look elsewhere in the world, this is already happening and getting deployed, right? There are already people streaming game services to phones in places like China. We have people that are partners of ours, like at GDC. Tencent showed a system that they built around Intel hardware, which started as a stuff they were doing for kind of testing all the range of permutations of phones. So they were like emulating all these different phones on PC hardware. And then they realized, hey, we can just send these frames over, and then like legacy phones can all just get a good experience, right? So the point of view I tend to take, I mean, there's obviously people that are responsible for, the business of selling high-end PCs that are worried, hey, is this going to displace those systems? There's people responsible for selling hardware into data centers. So like, this is great, right? We have the advantage of selling silicon on both ends of the wire. So as long as it sells compute somewhere, it usually ends up being good for us. I tend to think that, and again, just, my personal view here, number one, like more paths to the cash register is also always good. More choice for consumers about what way you can get stuff, subscription, download, trade off some quality for lower price, like just more choice for people is a good thing. And I think that in the end, the potential of those kinds of systems to take today's games and deliver them in a like more efficient manner is way less interesting than what it'll do, than what you guys will do to actually change the design of the games and the design of the medium, right? Netflix not making you get a DVD is less interesting than Netflix engendering like releasing a whole season of a show at once and letting you binge on it, right? That changes the dynamic of how you consume the content, how you make the content. And so I think for some of these streaming services, like, part of what I've challenged some of my team on is like, okay, so you've got a petaflop of computing in the cloud. What if everybody connecting to that also has, teraflops of compute on their local system? What is a game developer rubbing their hands together and thinking about what they can do and saying, here, hold my beer, right? I think it's exciting. I think that, there'll be a lot of kinks along the way. We'll see, whether it's Stadia or something else that delivers a good solution. It's all good at the end.
So one related technology that I think you talk a lot about is augmented reality. Yeah. You made a great speech last year where you presented a day in the life of somebody in 2025.
Yeah. At AWE, right?
Yeah. And I found that fantastic because some of the games / experiences you were mentioning there seemed really practical. And I thought Mascot Melee was one of them. UBU was another one. The garbage truck route optimization.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that anybody who wants to see a really cool vision of the future should go watch that.
Yeah, it's up on YouTube. Go check it out. No, thanks. That means a lot. I'm flattered that you liked it. I will say a couple of the concepts were ripped off wholesale from various science fiction kind of stuff. So Halting State by Charles Strauss is like required reading in my team. Not required, but I buy a lot of copies of it and give it to new employees and stuff. That has it was actually Ralph Koster who turned me on to the book. That was like, man, I don't know who this author is, but he's nailing so many things on point about potential future of MMOs and stuff like that. And the Mascot Melee was actually riffing on a concept in one of my favorite books from past couple of years called Lady of Mazes, which is a really like hard science fiction, far in the future, to the point where AR is pre-installed and you don't even know that it is, so you don't really know what's real and what's not. And in the opening chapter, the author has this kind of fiction around your like social media feed, which is a bunch of your friends just kind of pop up as little fairies around you, and you interact with them, and you don't know whether it's kind of them live or their AI stand-in, and you kind of don't care because the AI is good enough that you just, it wouldn't matter one way or the other. And so we did this, concept of like the characters kind of running around your breakfast table and fighting with the snap, crackle, pop on your cereal box and stuff. So yeah, I can't claim total credit. I was ripping off other ideas.
Well, what I loved about it was that it presented something that seemed very likely, given that we've been reading plenty about up and coming AR companies and some very established companies like Microsoft and HoloLens who are spending a lot of time and money to make this a reality. But related to the streaming that we were just talking about and sort of the render farms sending you content, were your concepts sort of also based on that there's a compute farm somewhere that is doing a lot of the work and then sending it to your local device that has the petaflops of compute power as well?
Yeah, there's a version of, I'm trying to remember if I actually made this external, and if not, I should do so. But there's a version of that presentation that has kind of the paper behind it of like, here's all the tech kind of concepts and ideas that it's based on. And there are some things that are like, hey, this is a solvable problem. It's a matter of kind of time and Moore's law and cost. And there are other things that are just like not solved, right?
Okay.
Like hard problems, many of which have, and I said this in the talk, that have to do with like design and privacy policy and open versus closed systems and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, each of those concepts kind of riffs on a couple ideas that we see happening in tech space. So you mentioned the streaming of frames idea. So when I built the VR team in our organization, we were looking at a number of challenges and problems, right? So I did this thing where this was like almost career suicide in retrospect. We got so I gave a talk to like our executive board, our CEO, and kind of all the executive VPs and stuff, and got Vive Pre's, like a dozen of them, and gave them all to them. I was like, I'm going to give a big talk and I'm going to have like an Oprah moment. You get a Vive Pre and you get one. And I got one myself. And then I took mine home and I started to set it up and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I've got a bunch of, guys that spend most of their time looking at spreadsheets and stuff. And this is not exactly friendly to set up, right? Anyway, a number of them actually went home and installed them. So good for them. They were pretty hands-on. And I immediately got the first feedback from the CEO was, hey, you got to get rid of this wire off the back of my head. Like, this has got to be wireless. End of story. Go make it happen, right? And we went and like 2 years later or something, collaborated with HTC and with some other partners and with our YGig team, and actually ended up building a system for the Vive, right? So there's an add-on module that HTC sells that we help them develop, and in tackling that whole space, we were thinking about, okay, well, what should exist on one side of the wire versus another? Where should you be doing, reprojection or time warp or whatever variant of kind of like masking or hiding latency or trading off versus error, and realize that, hey, if I'm doing this from a local PC to here, it's not that much different to do it from like edge compute at some point in the future when things like 5G are around. So a lot of those same ideas and same technology will reemerge, not just from us. Like they're not unique ideas, and they'll be part of solving the problem, right? Like it's one thing to kind of solve all these optics problems to make the glasses smaller, et cetera. But if it's still attached to a compute brick, it's not going to be a really mainstream solution. And so you either dumb down the experience or you find a way to move most of the compute somewhere else and keep the thing, light on your head or whatever. So,
well, that's an interesting choice. Mm-hmm. Do you think which one do you think is more mass market viable?
It's all a question of when and for what. So I did an article for VentureBeat a while back that did you see this thing going around on the internet a year back that was called the wheel of cognitive dissonance, and it talked about all these different things, right? So I did a riff on that was about like all the trade-offs in AR systems. And I said, look, at the end of the day, the thing that does all the stuff at kind of 10 out of 10 level isn't viable. And if it was, it would cost a fortune and it would have a car battery attached to it. So it's really a matter of picking trade-offs. And there's a school of thought that says, I'm going to try and just pick a couple use cases and do a really good job of them. Like what Jerry's doing at Tilt 5 is a great example, right? I'm going to just do like AR for board games on your tabletop and that's it. That's great. Like it's, I can't do this, I can't do that. Yeah, but you could really nail that experience, right? So it's a good example. Whereas maybe people like Magic Leap are saying, I'm going to try and do the whole system, but I'm going to trade off affordability and I'm going to trade off maybe the quality of some of the things. It's not like, those glasses don't weigh 50 grams, right? So I don't know that there's a right answer. I think there's going to be a lot of trade-offs and a lot of implementations, and the market will have to decide what works or not. I'll give you an example that we showed so my team develops a bunch of like proofs of concepts, and we showed this as a proof of concept at AWE last year in just like a video presentation. But we did a thing where we took a set of AR glasses from this company, Nreal, out of China. They have a very, very lightweight pair of glasses with inside-out tracking, but then it has a USB-C cord and it requires the computer to be somewhere else. And so we did a thing where we plugged them into a laptop and just take your extended Windows desktop and just do the other monitors outside your main monitor. So if you normally have 2 or 3 monitors at your desk and you go on the road, you can put these things on, you get your other monitors back while you still use your main one, which is still higher res and stuff. That's it. That's all it does. Doesn't play games, doesn't do all these other things. But it's an example of like, can I really nail that one use case at the expense of trying to do everything? And we'll see whether someone takes up that kind of concept. But
what was the response?
People are interested. There is a couple of partners that are kind of talking to us about what it would take to adopt it. I can't talk about what they're doing.
Obviously, I wouldn't ask you that. But I guess what I'm interested in is what if you tested it out on people who are multi-monitor users, did they find it compelling?
I would say they found it. We did a series of, let's say, demos and sit-down tests that people said, oh, wow, it's surprisingly readable, surprisingly usable. Quality is really good. I would really like this. We didn't get to a stage of, okay, great, take it home and use it in your hotel tonight, right? And there were some, quirks of it being demoware that it wasn't yet at that level of productivity. So if somebody chose to take it up and actually productize it, you'd have to go through kind of a next round of user testing where you said, okay, I need to get it to more closer to real products so that I can test all that functionality.
That makes sense. I mean, we also work in AR, and we talked about a lot of non-game use cases. That being one of them. Another, just as a AR browser that would replace what you normally do on your computer, chat, all the stuff that probably people immediately think of when they start to fantasize about making AR stuff.
Yeah.
And we had the same questions. Would it be practical? And one of the things we actually ran into when brainstorming was the limitations of FOV, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted, just as an expert, you being the expert, I want to ask you, where are we going on that? Because I don't quite understand the physics limitations that we're experiencing right now with existing headsets.
So on things like field of view, for VR, AR, or both?
AR.
Okay, so I think that if you think about the ways that people are doing AR displays, you basically have people that are doing camera pass-through AR in VR headsets that may surprise me and get to a quality that it's like surprisingly good and usable. And I do think it has its place, but I think that for an everyday AR, wear it out in the real world thing, like your primary criteria is I need to be able to interact with the world in the way that I've been doing for 50 years, right? Yeah. And so it feels like you need see-through at that point. And then you've got either the kind of, a small OLED panel with a half mirror, or you've got waveguides. They both have their sets of trade-offs, both of which are working towards kind of widening the field of view and the resolution. It's basically take that resolution and then you have a trade-off in terms of cost of optics, where the given process technology is at. Like, so for like waveguides as an example, there are, a handful of vendors that kind of have locked up all the IP space and are in a kind of arms race and tend to be neck and neck, which is why you tend to see things like a Magic Leap and a HoloLens, when they come out around the same time, they tend to have something comparable in terms of field of view. And then it's a question of, okay, how much cost do I incur on the optics to put that closer to my eye? And that'll have some trade-off in terms of aberrations and calibration stuff. Like the Magic Leap is a little bit cumbersome to kind of get calibrated to start with, right? Yeah. So it'll get better. I think that also the field of view thing is interesting because it's not clear to me that you need a 180 degree field of view. It depends on the use case and what you're looking to see. Maybe the way to think about it is, and I haven't plotted this, just theory, there's probably a knee in the curve kind of trade-off at what point does whatever your object of interest kind of give you enough field of view that you don't really think about it, right? Certainly when it's like 20 or 30 degrees, it's painful. I'm clipping it all kinds, right? Once you get to a certain point, it's I'm focused on that object on my table or what have you.
Yeah. When do you think, this is a big question, when do you think we will see a truly mass market AR headset?
The favorite answer that analysts will give you is like, when Apple builds something, because they do, they do stuff, right? Well, answer. It's not my answer. It's a bit tongue in cheek. Geez, I don't know. It feels like the idea of I'm comfortable wearing them out in public glasses. That means they have to be 75 grams or something and achieve some set of functionality. That's a long way off unless you limit the use cases, like guys like, we had this Vaunt project going for a while, and then there's some other guys that are just doing the limited, show me my text messages and not much else, right? And so then it becomes a question of, well, will someone pick the one or two use cases that's good enough for me? Will someone do driving directions? Maybe, maybe navigation or stuff like that. I'm not sure that's the use case, but something limited, that feels like it's feasible in a couple of years. Otherwise, they're going to be a little more cumbersome, which means you need to either you stay in the commercial space, maybe it comes down in price and gets to, some more widespread uses in outside of these, high-end niches, or you nail some kind of gaming system that people are comfortable. There's, taking out with them. I could see people wearing like slightly awkwardly heavy glasses to have, next gen Pokemon Go, but then they can't cost $500, right?
Yeah.
So it's rough. I don't know, man.
Well, you mentioned the weight,
Yeah.
right? Are you also implying the style is important? Is there a stigma that you guys have found associated with any kind of headset?
Yeah. I mean, I knew some folks on the Vaunt team before we kind of wound that project down, and certainly they were looking for what is the thing that you'll wear all day long out in public, wear to meetings, wear to a nightclub or what have you. And at that point, it's like, yes, there are some really hard barriers, right? And then they would go have meetings with people that make stylish eyewear and kind of say, hey, the thing you thought was great, like not good enough yet, right? And so there's a really hard barrier there. It's hard to say if you could have like a slightly awkward version of that you might get people over the hump on, like, people wear the AirPods, and that's a little bit weird, and yet people accept it. So it might be okay at a certain point, or it might be I take, they accessorize my phone or some other new type of system, and I put them on when I'm doing something, and then I take them off when I'm talking to my friends. We'll see. But I do think that, for general outdoor everyday use, there's both a stigma. There's then there's kind of like a fatigue factor. If it's too heavy, you just don't want to wear them for a long time. And then there's all the kind of like, they're also sensors, right? So all that stuff we went through with Google Glass, like people need to get comfortable that you might be filming them. And, so I don't know what that's going to end up looking like.
Yeah, that seems really hard, especially when you're talking about inside out tracking and having to have cameras on the outside of VR or AR headsets, right?
Yeah.
So I don't, have you guys talked about a way to make those things more socially acceptable?
I think we've talked about it. I don't have an answer.
Okay.
Right. I would say that I have a pet theory that it's like, no matter what technology development you do, there's kind of a societal rate of absorption that they have to go through. People have to get used to stuff, right? We went through it with cell phones. Like what are you doing with that phone in a restaurant, or people that wouldn't mute it in a movie theater, or the fact that people are taking pictures around and some people are sensitive to it. And now people are kind of, it's settled down a lot. There's a new normal, right? Whether it's people learn to mute their phone or people got comfortable to there being cameras out there. I don't know that you can accelerate that. I think products have to come out and people have to get angry at one another and find a new set of rules. And
do you think there is a product or a killer app that is necessary to break things open for AR? And you presented a whole bunch of them in your talk last year, but is there something that you consider the app or device that everybody has to have?
The high level thing you see out of most people's concept stuff around AR is this idea of like, give me superpowers. And I don't mean that in the kind of, that sounds a little too exaggerated, but if you think about the thing that really sold, iPhones and Galaxies and other smartphones after the fact, at first it was like, oh, look, it's got, it's all it's your iPod and your camera, and it's also a phone and it's portable. But eventually it was, I have the internet in my pocket, right? And then you think about all the stuff that's added to, like, I can take a picture of something and recognize what it is. I can instantly, hear a song and go, tell me what that song is. So it's augmented all of my senses and powers. So making that just instantly accessible is in itself a killer app. But once someone starts to kind of cross that barrier, and that might happen with the smartphone AR, I don't know. I think you'll see, something will click as like, oh, we didn't think that was the thing, but that's the thing, right? So yeah, kind of a vague answer, but
that's a great answer. It makes a lot of sense. And we were joking earlier about our age and how we're in our 50s, but there's an entire generation that is now, well, at least 2 generations removed from us, who are adopting technology faster than we've ever seen, and embracing new processes that are driven by these technologies. Do you think that makes a difference in the future adoption of AR, VR, any of the things that we dream about all the time?
I think it certainly should remind us that that all of us old kind of grizzled veterans or self-styled wise people, it's going to get adopted in ways that we didn't anticipate, right? We're going to see people, whether it's the ways in which people are streaming games or what turns out to be the killer app. Like, you look at how the kids these days are using technology, and there's always surprises there, right? Not just in the ways in which they're using it, but kind of what their criteria are, right? I remember going through a set of discussions just in our home about, like, the older people in our home, myself and my wife, being kind of, hey, we need to have all of the digital pictures. Are they all archived, and where are they stored? And all the kids are like, what happened to that photo? I don't know. Like, it's in the cloud somewhere. And if I find it, I find it. And if I don't, I don't. And it wasn't like a confidence, oh, Google has a hold of it. It was kind of like, no, it's ephemeral. And at the end of the day, nothing lasts forever, right? So that's an example of kind of a different kind of expectation out of what they get out of their tech, and the storing of files and things like that.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. I'll share another amusing anecdote. So I mentioned that my older son is kind of like big gamer and uses Windows-based PCs. I have a younger son as well. It's all Chromebook all the time, and also plays on everything. But for his like schoolwork and stuff, it's all Chromebook. He had an assignment. He had to do something in Photoshop. So the older boy is going to teach him how to use Photoshop. And I walk by when he's explaining to him, you need to save the file. You need to go on the hard drive and make a folder and name the file and put it here and remember where you've put it. And the other kid looked at him like he was from outer space. He was like, why would anyone ever do that? He goes, I can log into any Chromebook in the world and all my stuff's there. Like, I forget it. I don't need any of this file saving stuff. It's like he was talking about punch cards, right? It was like, they're 4 years apart, right? Like, it's not that big. And suddenly there's this huge difference. So, yeah.
Well, I think too, you're describing gamer behaviors as well.
Yeah.
Right? When we talk about our save files now, I used to get really paranoid that my kids would erase my saves on my PlayStation 2 or 3.
Right. Yeah.
And now I'm a member of PlayStation Plus, so it's all uploaded, and I just, wherever I am, work, home, I can actually access my saves, which is,
right.
I know, sort of a pedestrian example of what you're taling about.
No, it's the same thing, right?
It has been a shift.
Yeah, it's a shift in the way we use it, and then the way that they interact with and use these games. It's like, Minecraft's a great example, right? My younger kid plays a ton, and he plays it on like 3 or 4 different platforms, and it's not always the same login, and he kind of doesn't care, right? It's like, oh, he can just kind of very like fluidly just flow from like, no, here I was playing with these 3 friends, and then the battery ran out in this device, so I switched over to the console, and now it's different people, and it's fine. I'm still locked in on some Fortnite or what have you, right? And it's just all day long. So yeah, it's an interesting shift in how people are using stuff, right?
Yeah,
and like the streaming to me was at first a mystery. I kind of now get it. I've found some content that I like and that I'll watch from time to time. But at first, to see, like, to come down and, you kids, you've been on the screens too long, it's Minecraft. No, we're watching other people play Minecraft. I didn't get it for a long time, right? And now I, totally understand.
I have to admit, I still don't get it. I think I would much rather play than watch. Yeah. But I agree. I think that there is a type of entertainment that is new for us. I mean, obviously, we've been watching other people perform artistically in athletics, et cetera, for millennia.
Sure.
Right. This is essentially the same thing, but arguably more interesting.
Yeah. Or I think there's more because it's happening natively on the internet. And so there can be a wider selection of channels. It's not all, there's a wider variety of the way people are, the ways in which people are doing things. Like, sure, you could watch somebody that is the best player of game XYZ, right? I had coffee this morning with a friend of mine who's a VP at Disney, and she was telling me about being hooked on this streamer that is a kind of teenage girl who's trying. She's streaming The Sims, and her whole thing is like having 100 babies. She wants to like have 100 babies in her house, and I guess at a certain point, your resources start to run low, and it's hard to scale to that thing, and it's like hugely popular, right? Or have you seen the stuff that's happening with GTA 5? So I'm going to butcher the name. I think it's GTA 5 RPG is what it's called, but it's a month or two ago. In terms of top Twitch streams, GTA 5 popped up back on the radar, and it's like, a multi-year-old game. So what's going on? Somebody's built a system where, if I get the numbers right, 250 people can log in. But in order to log in, they have to basically kind of sign up to play a role. They have to submit who their persona is, what they're going to do, and then it's basically 250 person improv. Right, with all of these like Twitch streamer personalities who all kind of in GTA 5 play. I'm the old grizzled man. I'm the kind of femme fatale, and then it's just go follow any one of them as they interact with each other. It's a giant live reality show / improv thing. It's like the most interesting thing happening on television, kind of, even though it's on Twitch, right?
That's amazing. Yeah. Stars emerging from places we would never expect.
Yeah, and just the ways in which it's getting remixed and formulated is amazing.
Yeah. Well, so sort of a parallel topic is VR and where that's going.
Sure.
And I know that I know that people who probably don't play VR and aren't as familiar with it, maybe the closest cultural association is Ready Player One.
Yeah.
And to me, what you're talking about sort of evokes that idea that we can all go to this place and we can be together and we can be whoever we want. And VR arguably has been the closest way, as at least presented that promise to us. Kind of like I asked about AR, is that a potential future for VR? For total immersion, total social connection.
It's interesting. I mean, the go somewhere and be who you want to be doesn't necessarily mean total immersion, right? That could be a 2D MMO, could be a chat forum, could be anything. But having a space where people can try on different persona or interact in a kind of more improvisational way versus a scripted, like, you are Master Chief and here's what you're going to do or you're going to fail. I think there's loads of potential for that stuff, and there's room for that to overlap with VR. I think that, turning and looking at the VR topic, I think there are people that want a highly immersive and highly, not necessarily scripted, but auteured kind of experience, right? I want whether it's a AAA game or a more kind of indie thing, I want a crafted experience that I'm going to, that came out of someone's imagination, got turned into a thing that then I can go immerse myself in and be amazed, right? And then there are, and you see that in whether it's, taking Skyrim and doing a VR version of it, or whether it's in a Space Pirate Trainer or Beat Saber or what have you. That's like a particular experience that's authored and people are in. All the Alchemy titles are a great example too, right? And then if you look more at the kind of more freeform, VR chat and other things, people are then, there's a thirst for environments in which people can, interact in some way, whether it's like they all agree, here's what the rules are, we're going to go in and do this thing, or whether they just all jump in and just kind of hang out. There's room for all of those things to exist. And then you get all the challenges of, okay, how compelling is the experience? What's the cost? What's the friction to get in? What's the pain points? And, early on when we started our VR team and our involvement there, we made kind of like, I'm sure everybody's got the same list. Like, here's a list of all the stuff that needs to get better, right? It needs to get cheaper. It needs to be wireless. It needs to have better resolution. It needs to not weigh as much. And, long list like that. And it's daunting, right? It's a long way off from being a, flip a switch and forget about it kind of an experience. And, I think the Quest is a great example of like, okay, a couple of the friction points they nailed, really far off the charts. Then other things are still limit. Other things maybe, they in that sense of trade-offs, they kind of took a step backwards on like, okay, it's a little bit lower fidelity, it's a little less compute power, but no wire, easy to get into. they think that's a good set of trade-offs. It probably is for some set of people. So
I think back to your point about the, you mentioned this about AR. You've got the all bells and whistles, extremely expensive version, and then you've got the immediately accessible, maybe lower res, which could be more mass market. I've tried the Quest, and I was really impressed.
Yeah, me too.
Because I didn't care that it was slightly lower res than the Rift. What I liked was I could walk around and I could feel like I really was in the game, and I wasn't worried about yanking the cord out of the PC.
Right.
So that was awesome.
Yeah. No doubt. And that's what I'm saying. Like their set of trade-offs of okay, I will be I'll nail all those things on ease of use, and I'll give up a little bit on visual fidelity, is probably for a lot of people absolutely the right trade-off. If somebody really wants a big high-end kind of Skyrim type game, or they want to use it for a high-end commercial rendering, then they might end up saying, okay, now how do I wirelessly get some frames off another device? Or maybe I prefer a tethered solution. I think that the out-of-box thing that most impressed me about that was their evolution to the kind of initial mapping out of your space, like just throw it on and the pass-through camera happens. It was like, oh yeah, all the PC solutions are going to do this. This is the new normal. Like, they just nailed it. So good for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope I think it opens up a lot of design opportunities as well for developers. Yeah. But I think it's a great step forward. What else do you think needs to happen? Because you had a whole list of things that you guys believe need to change for this to be mass market. What's the next sort of threshold that VR has to pass?
Well, I mean, the most kind of blatant answer is like it needs to get to 10 or 20 million units, right? It needs to get to an install base where
that's sort of what I meant. I mean, to get there, other things have to occur to encourage people to pick one up. It's sort of more of a no-brainer to go out and buy a headset because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, because there's great content there, right? And so there's one view that says, okay, maybe people kind of bootstrap all these things, and it's no one element. Maybe it's like a couple of the right games get a few more people to buy it, makes the install base a little bigger, but gets a few more indie guys doing it. One guy nails the next Beat Saber, and that gets a few more people to buy it. There's that point of view as well. I think that the having a good library of kind of high quality content like the Quest has been aiming to do will go a long way in getting there. I'm a little concerned about, there's again pros and cons to this, but the fact that it is a kind of more closed platform and you can't just ship your titles on it means you kind of have to bank that the crew over there makes the right decisions about what titles to put on the platform, and that they don't miss something or don't expend all their funding and money on titles that don't resonate. I know it's not any one factor. It's all these things, right?
Well, maybe it's not games. I mean, Intel, you guys just recently broadcast a Raptors game in VR. Right?
Yeah. We have a whole group that's doing they're doing more than VR. There's an Intel sports group who's viewing kind of the digitization of broadcast sports events in all kinds of ways as an opportunity to say, well, we build compute solutions, we can go do that, right? So we acquired two companies a while back and have turned them into two Intel technologies, one of which is a kind of streaming of like 360 video, but they do it from multiple viewpoints. So you can say, well, I want to be at this end of the stadium, or let me shift over there. And then it's live streamed. We debuted that, or first kind of large scale debut was at the Winter Olympics in Korea, where we broadcast a bunch of events, and we were all sitting in my lab in Oregon with headsets on, watching people do the ski jumps and stuff, which is pretty cool. And then there's another bit of tech that they have there where they've outfitted stadiums, basketball stadiums and some football stadiums with whole arrays of high-res cameras, and then they put like a really beefy amount of computing in the basement or somewhere in the building, and they real time basically like crunch all those video feeds and turn it into a giant high-res voxel map.
Wow.
Right. And so if you, and that's initially been done as a broadcast technology. So if you look at NFL football, you can see clips where they'll say, hey, let's go look what the point of view was from the quarterback. And you see this kind of pixelated voxel view. That's our tech doing that. But the goal is that eventually that should be stuff that you can stream, right? So will that be the killer app? I don't know, but it certainly adds to the adds to the mix of stuff that the market is playing with and experimenting with, right?
Do you think that more traditional B2B applications are also helping make inroads? Because I don't think on the gaming side we hear much about that. We kind of see it peripherally happening where large companies are investing heavily in VR training. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
But we sort of ignore that, probably potentially at the risk of missing out on opportunities.
Yeah. Well, it depends. Like, if you were a struggling games company that said, I'm going to go do some contract work and build a medical imaging solution or do architectural walkthroughs or whatever, then maybe it's good to have an eye on that stuff. So it certainly helps from the perspective of, we have seen adoption in retail, medical, architectural, like all the segments that maybe used VR at the very, very highest end, right? Maybe you were an architect firm bidding on a Vegas casino and it's a multi-million-dollar deal. You can afford the VR rig to do it. Now it can be something that you're trying to show someone their kitchen, their kitchen remodel, right? And it's affordable to do. So all those segments are adopting it, and that helps, if for no other reason, because it just gets more scale to the industry, which brings price of headsets down and price of computers down and stuff. So
I'll admit that we did that here. We are replacing a lot of our desks and with more modern desks, and the firm that's designing them brought in HoloLens units for everybody to use. And so we cleared out one of our conference rooms and everybody was walking around
that's awesome.
looking at the desks in the space. And it was really useful because we identified problems that we would have never identified had we just looked at static renderings. At least I don't think we would have, because being able to sort of bend down and look under it and walk around it gave more context to the design.
Yeah, like you could imagine a kitchen remodel or something where you're like, hey, I can't actually see out the window because that cabinet when I'm like sitting over here and stuff is, that feels like a kind of a no-brainer, right?
Yeah. Oh, so what do you think of haptics? I think you've mentioned that before in various times you've been out talking about VR.
Well, I think that there was an early wave of stuff in this wave of VR and in the previous wave 20 years back where like the moment people say VR is happening, it's like, okay, well, what can I do? Well, which of the senses is up for grabs? I'll do the olfactory peripheral and I'll do the haptic stuff. And so some of the stuff is very gimmicky, and then some of the stuff is very useful. Certainly for some of these professional apps, having kind of like high precision tactile feedback for like a surgeon or something is one could envision that being important, right? I will say I was surprised. Have you done any of the Void experiences?
No, folks here at Insomniac have, and I haven't gotten a chance to go down to do it.
So I only got around to doing it over spring break. I brought my kids down to the LA area, and we went and did the one down at Downtown Disney, and did both the Star Wars one and the Wreck-It Ralph one, or Ralph Wrecks the Internet. And I expected that I would get kind of like best physical presence move around type of experience, that it would have some kind of kitschy haptics, and that that wouldn't be the thing, and it almost was the opposite in that the haptics were very effective, right? It has like some motion stuff in the vest, and then they do a thing where you like you emerge from a building over kind of a lava field, and they like pump in like some fake smoke smell. And like it was super compelling. And I talked to a number of other people that all said that was like the thing that did it for them. So I don't know if it's because I'm so used to VR and that was novel to me, but I was surprised at how a simple, sensory effect that I wasn't expecting turned out to be a big part of the experience. So, we'll see.
Do you think that's haptics and maybe olfactory or other things,
Yeah.
are a reasonable expectation for VR players a few years down the road? Or is it still a niche thing? And I ask this because we've been approached by haptics companies as well, because we're in VR, and the approach we tend to take is, well, it needs to be adopted on a wider scale first before we can build that support into our games.
Yeah, I mean, and which turns into, okay, which of the VR vendors is making a bet on it, right? So like, so in the same way that, Oculus did the like finger presence thing, and then Valve said, okay, well, we're going to do the, all the fingers on the Knuckles controller, right? I would imagine that one of those vendors will take kind of what's the VR equivalent of like, Rumble, right? Like there'll be something in the controller, maybe in the headset, that is slightly more than just a vibration, and that might be enough to say, oh, that's really compelling, and I can now count it as part of the base experience. But for the very reasons you're saying, I don't think you're going to see like people donning whole body vests and pants and stuff like that. It gets hard to do those things, and the fragmentation that you talk about is part of it too. You might see some in, like with the Void, like in various location based things, but again, it'll be a backpack PC or a vest of some kind, maybe with it's like arcadey stuff, right? So maybe you're getting the bullet hit in the chest, but not necessarily, or a tap on the shoulder, not necessarily anything of high precision. It's hard to imagine that would be warranted. So
I hope someday though it does become accessible, easy to use, and pervasive. It would be great, because I mean, I think for any of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, at least I remember hearing about VR back then and going, oh man, that would be so great to be truly immersed, where everything I see is believable. I'm feeling the dragon's breath, or whatever it happens to be.
Maybe it turns out that like each of those has their own version of the uncanny valley. Like, are you better off with no haptics than bad haptics? Right? I don't know. Somebody will have to try. And
well, I think your example of the Rumble controller, right? Yeah. I think the console manufacturer's implementation of Rumble has had, I think, a significant effect on how we think about combat in games, how we think about traversal, and it actually does, I think, enhance the experience quite a bit, because it becomes one of those subtle, unconscious triggers that just makes you feel a little bit more there.
Right. Yeah. And maybe it took that kind of, decades worth of developers adopting it and moving from just a switch it on and off to, okay, can I get, asking them, can I get analog control for it? Can I have independent left-right control? Or, I don't even know what all the parameters they give you these days are. But
you can do a lot with it. But the funny thing is you can and you can't. Right. We feel like there are absolute limitations, but the tiny tweaks you can make actually do make a difference to gamers, because you can tell the difference between a hard rumble and a soft rumble, or the timing, or the ramp up into the full rumble. Right. Like those are all subtle signals that I think we as gamers begin to understand as the lexicon of a particular game. So
there's a bunch of things happening in like I'm not even sure. I guess it's I don't even know the word for it. Kind of the mix of haptics with input. If you think about what some of the phone guys have done to kind of give you subtle feedback on virtual keyboard, like a tiny vibration that almost tricks you into thinking that there was a bump on the screen or a tactile thing, so that you mentally register that you've hit the right thing, right? That there may be little tricks like that aren't really about, oh, let me fool you into thinking you were hit with a club over the shoulder, and more, did I correctly grab the door handle? Right. Because right now there's a lot of like, I need to see the controller switch from red to blue when I squeeze the trigger. That means my hand successfully grasped it in 3D space. Maybe it's just a subtle little vibration or something like that will give you enough there, right?
Yeah. I think it's a great point. We tend to forget about these things because we look at the sort of the macro solution versus all the little tiny clues that we can introduce. I actually, when you said that, I was thinking about my watch. I've got an Apple Watch, and the bezel will vibrate slightly depending on what you're doing. And that kind of slight resistance is really transfers a lot of information for me in terms of what I'm doing.
Exactly. Right. They're masters of that kind of stuff. And so will we see the things like are there versions of that with the headset? Can I do a little tweak on your cheekbone and tell you something, or or with the controllers again? There was a I don't know what's happened to this company, but somebody that was making the rounds demoing a VR controller early in this wave of VR that claimed to give you, so one of the issues right now is I can take a controller and hold it in my hand, but if I can't make it exert force on me. I can't take the controller and make it feel like somebody's trying to twist it to the left or right. And this guy gave me this controller and put it in these various demo modes and said, okay, now it's a heavy weight with momentum, and I move it and it feels like it has momentum. And he goes, now it's on the spring, and I take it and it feels like someone's pulling back on my hand. I'm like, it's like black magic. How is it accomplishing this? And what it was doing was it had actuators on all sides of the controller that were just pushing slightly on the skin of my hand.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you could say gyroscopes or something.
No,
but-
no.
okay.
That's what I thought at first too. And it was just mentally enough that the slight force on my skin simulated what you would feel if somebody was pulling on this thing and it was in your hand, and that like mentally made the association for me, right? So there were a bunch of other reasons why the demo was kind of kludgy and stuff, but it was an interesting example of like, hey, there's a lot of different kind of input. We have a lot of senses that work in a lot of ways, and there are whole things that aren't yet explored with temperature and different types of tactile senses, and
it's pretty neat to be here where all of those things are a possibility now, a real possibility without costing thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
So I hope all of this comes to pass.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So going back to your prediction for 2025, one
Right.
of your Mascot Melee
Yeah.
example, you were talking about how AI is acting on behalf of friends,
Yeah.
right? And you guys also do a lot of work in AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I read about one use of AI that Intel is experimenting with is flagging toxic behavior.
Yeah,
online.
yeah. That's actually coming out of my team, right?
Really? So can
Yeah.
you tell us more about that?
Sure. So I guess first off, like AI is a whole other topic. There's
I know, we can
lots
probably talk
there's
for
lots of
10
types
hours
of
on it.
AI, and then there's like the current kind of wave of interest in machine learning and this kind of brute force application of AI to large data sets and stuff. So we and this effort that we showcase, again, just proof of concept, no commitment on product yet, though we'd like to see something happen. We showed this thing at GDC this year. This was born out of, we said, looking at this kind of, other billion people playing games on PCs and saying, okay, how can we make their lives better? What are they doing? And being Intel, we tend to go to, smoother frame rate and better compute, and maybe make it a bit thinner and, make the battery last longer, this kind of thing. And we did some, user research. We have kind of teams of ethnographers that go talk to people in different markets and watch them use technology in their homes, and talk to some people, and also took some external market research doing similar type of stuff. And the pain points, the things that were bubbling up to the top of the list weren't those things. They were things like toxicity, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you have a smoother frame rate. If I jump into a game of Apex Legends and I go to speak and I have a female voice, and then people just start saying awful things, right? In esports or just online games in general, like cheating, right? Like, again, your performance is great. I don't like it when I try really hard to win, and then I just realize like all these guys are cheating at the game, right? So there was a bit of an eye-opener moment saying, okay, we need to work on the stuff we usually work on, but we should say, can we play a role in any of these other things? Can we look at them, right? And so to zero in on the toxicity topic as an example, the kind of first very easy kind of conclusions to make is, well, it's not a technology problem. It's kind of a design problem and a community administration problem. Part of it might be a legal problem, or there's a whole bunch of facets of that problem. We said, can we take tech and is there anybody out there taking technology to try and help solve part of the problem? We did a proof of concept. We ran into this company called Spirit AI. Spirit AI does, and there's a few companies doing this, doing kind of application of AI to text chat and to online forums and stuff, and saying, okay, can I spot toxic behavior, bad language, harassment, hate speech, spam. There's like a whole litany of different categories of stuff. And not just like, oh, go look for this keyword, but can I spot trends through a conversation? Can I spot the behavior of a bad actor? Can I spot the reemergence of a bad actor with a different tag or name associated, right? And they'd been looking at this for some time. And we said, hey, do you have... can you do this with like voice chat in games? And they said, no, we do it with text. And we said, well, we have some speech to text technology. Can we try plugging them together? Right. And so we did a proof of concept that was like, wiggling on a workbench kind of thing of, yeah, we can take streams out of YouTube and show that we can successfully of toxic behavior in games, because that's where sometimes people will upload their clips of, look how I got treated by this dude over here, and kind of show the transcript of stuff and show that we're flagging it early, right? So it's like, okay, we proved that you can do that. Now, where does that go as a potential product, right? Whether with this company or another company? What we suggested, was, hey, it's feasible to go do this. It's fairly obvious that people that are providing tools to developers and to platforms that are going to implement this stuff themselves, that you could use this to basically zero in on problems sooner and get it in front of a human operator or a moderator of some kind more quickly, right? So you're not yet at the point of making decisions using AI, but you're kind of saying, hey, you should look over here, and maybe lowering the cost of doing that for the developer, or making it making them able to get to people's problems more quickly, right? Over time, we would like to see, moving to just having the capability work in a real-time fashion, and where it's been trained enough that you can confidently make decisions. And then you get into a bunch of interesting discussions over, who gets to make that decision, right? Is that the developer that says, these are the rules for my community? Or is it the end user saying, whatever those rules are, I have my own set of rules, right? So you might say, no hate speech in my community. I might say, well, no profanity when my kids are playing, right? And maybe those can coexist, maybe they can't. But I think we were just aiming first to kind of show that the technology can be done, and then we'll see where others run with it from there.
So is this an opportunity for an open effort where companies are banding together and saying, look, data is the key, right? Yeah. We have to have enough to train these algorithms to be more and more effective. Can we join forces?
Yeah, I think that some of this was born out of, I mentioned like these surveys that we did, but we were involved in kind of some, there was this hack harassment initiative, and there's a trade group called the Fair Play Alliance, where there was kind of a working group within there looking at this problem. And so that's come up as a potential collaboration area. I don't know. I haven't followed the latest with them on whether like people have agreed, like, yes, here's my data set, go. But it's certainly a next step. Like for the proof of concept that we did, we said, okay, it's fine for us to kind of show we can do some stuff with some YouTube clips, but to really measure how effective it is, we need to take someone's game and like train it, right? Or someone's chat system or someone's platform. So we're talking to some people about maybe doing that as like a next iteration, maybe next year's GDC, or maybe hopefully sooner. But
okay,
yeah.
Are there other places where you think developers should be thinking about, and it's a broad topic, AI, to address the just increasing complexity of game development?
I think there's already a bunch of companies that are using it for just things like testing, mm-hmm. right? Like, let me train virtual users and have them go, put my game through its paces with a bunch of AI playing the game, maybe as like a first wave, just to nail a big wave of bugs out of the gate. I don't know. I mean, you could probably tell me better whether people are doing it for things like, you could imagine that it could be useful for things like level design, right? Like, can I have a bunch of AI players, not just like test my game for bugs, but run through and kind of express whether they found the flow of a level to be satisfying, or whether they played a multiplayer map and there were kind of spots to unfairly camp. It wasn't like well balanced. A lot of stuff that I had been at Microsoft for a couple of years, and the Halo team, I think, gave some talks about how they were doing this, like what at the time was pretty ahead of the curve, like heat maps for like thousands of player tests to show, oh, we found a spot on the map that like gives players an unfair advantage, so we lopped it off, right? That seems like totally ripe for not using thousands of people, but using thousands of AIs, at least as a starting point.
I think you're right. And automated testing is an easy win. I mean, I think it's something that probably most of us are either looking into or starting to implement. I think the challenge that we as traditional developers encounter is that we're always moving really fast.
Right.
And investing those resources in experimenting with AI and figuring out how we can actually integrate it into the production design process or production process is it's a hurdle. But
how much cost do you put in building tools versus building your game?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And I think that it's all of us sort of need to sometimes just take a step back and think about that versus just going 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, hopefully some just like engine companies have popped up to solve some of those problems and say, hey, rather than, do I build my game or do I invest in my 3D engine editor? If some people have said, just license my Unreal Engine.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, that's
so hopefully they or other new companies will pop up and say, hey, we have a licensable AI solution for problem XYZ.
Well, actually, that's to me a little bit of a surprise. I would expect by now there would be a lot more companies who are popping up. But then again, not to wax too much on this topic, there aren't that many companies who are building their own engines and tools, right? A lot of people are relying on Unreal or Unity.
Right. Yeah, and so and maybe it's them that, like, I don't know if they have a contingent of AI people, slaving away on whatever. Like, Epic's huge these days. Yeah. I think that it'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of opportunity there.
So going back to open systems, do you think it's possible for our industry to embrace open systems?
Well, I hope so, because the PC is arguably the most open platform today. I mean, none of these things are 100% closed or 100% open. It's a spectrum, right? And so, even if they say, well, we're open to developers, we have an app store that you can submit on, but then there's a policy as to what you can or can't do, or your API is bound which part of the platform you can touch on, right? Certainly the PC has traditionally leaned more heavily to the open end of the spectrum and has benefited from it, right? The fact that people could come in and build a PCI card or an ISA card before that and drop it in and add some new functionality has made PC audio and PC 3D graphics proceed faster than if it had just been Intel doing the thing, right? So I hope that continues. I think there is a very and it continues to surprise me in that it does really well, but I worry a lot about the kind of critical mass that's required as the market gets bigger and bigger, and the appeal of closed systems in the face of all of this complexity that users are faced with of I'll just go buy a console or an iPhone or what have you because it's just easier. But there's this kind of symbiotic relationship that comes out of the two, right? Like a lot of the next gen features on any new wave of console are basically creating a packaged version of what kind of happened in the high-end enthusiast space first, right? And then it drives the popularity of it, and then the PC does the next version. So I think it's necessary for an open version to exist in order for the innovation to continue even on the closed platforms, but I don't know that everyone agrees. So
what a great connection, though. Yeah. I certainly would have never made it. So just to wrap up, I have a couple far-reaching questions. What excites you the most about where the technology you work with is going?
I think that it'll sound a bit. I think it'll sound a bit mundane, but I talked earlier about like that other billion people and the potential there. And Amy Henning touched on this in the podcast you did with her the other day, that there is like, I believe, a potential for games to go another kind of 10x level of growth over where it is today over the next decade. I think we'll look back and be surprised at how big it could go. And part of that means building systems that are capable of, high quality AAA experiences in an accessible way in the devices that they use every day. And that might mean, and that's going to mean for a high-end gamer, a high-performance system that they bought to kind of be on the bleeding edge. But it means that for all those other PC users, they need a thin laptop that they buy to take to school or to take to work. And the good news is that those are getting really capable, right? They're at the kind of very close to or soon surpassing kind of an Xbox One level of graphics performance and a bigger capacity of memory and stuff. So they'll be very capable. The phones are doing the same thing. And so this idea that just like today, almost any consumer computing device you buy can stream and run high-res video. We should be able to say the same thing about running games, whether that means running them locally or streaming them. It'll be a mix of all those things. And so that potential of opening it up beyond just that, 100 million to 200 million core gamers. I did a talk at Intel a while ago. We talk about this, like, $150 billion of gaming software. And you'll hear people say, oh, games are bigger than movies, but they're not, right? But like, that's box office. But when you look at the spending overall, the games are about 10% of the global media and entertainment spending, right? Which is like $1.4 trillion today. So games shouldn't be 10%. Games should do to TV and movies what they did to radio. Games should be the lion's share of that, right? So if it grows to 50% in the next decade or two, and games will change a lot, they'll be, I think you touched on some of this with Kiki and her thing the other day, that like these kind of new hybrids of Hollywood production and storyline, but with some interactivity, like borrowing from the tricks of both industries, or the best craftsmanship of both industries. We'll see a lot of stuff emerge there, but like there's just so much potential. Like that's what excites me. So
I think that's a wonderful and a bright, optimistic view. So thanks for sharing. I hope it comes true.
All right.
Well, we'll all work to try to make that come
Absolutely.
True. Kim, if people want to ask you additional questions, how can they reach you?
I'm Kim Pall, Kimpall on Twitter, and that's usually the best way. So.
Kim, thank you very much for being
on today. Thanks. I'm such a fan of the show. I'm thrilled to have done this. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.